Hi, I'm Tina, a senior at Cornell University and a member of the Harbinger China. In this episode, I have the pleasure of inviting a special guest, Adam Bao, the founder of the Harbinger platform. Adam advises Shengwei Capital and Xiaomi's portfolio companies for the past years, and most recently serves as the Senior Director of Strategies and Operations for Segway Ninebot, the supplier to scooter sharing giants Lime and Bird. Today's interview will be a special episode where Adam will be giving an overview of the state of Chinese startup ecosystem in a variety of sectors. So without further ado, let's welcome Adam. Awesome. So let's start with the sexy industry first, consumer internet. When people in the US talk about Chinese tech, the first thing that really came up is always WeChat. They've heard stories about how you can do everything with it, from paying for your parking to booking a gym class. So it basically breeds an entire ecosystem, a lot bigger than the chat app that it first started off with. So why don't you talk a little bit about WeChat and the new wave of apps that stem from the platform?
Sure. Yeah, it's good to start off with WeChat. I think it reflects a lot of what's happening in consumer internet in China. Just taking a step back first, I mean, some of the major developments have happened on mobile. Perhaps 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 years ago, there's a lot of new applications that came out. Messaging being one of the biggest ones, social media, payments. These are all things that WeChat encapsulates. And at least from an investor perspective these days, a lot of the low-hanging fruit in consumer internet has been taken. For example, short videos and live video, you have Kuaishou, you have Yizhibo, you have some of these companies. Social media, again, I mean, that's mostly QQ and WeChat. Messaging, obviously, WeChat's kind of taking the cake there. When it comes to e-commerce, a lot of those big opportunities, obviously Taobao, JD, increasingly Pinduoduo. So a lot of these big opportunities have been taken. So when you look at the future of consumer internet, what do people look at? And a lot of it is trying to find ways to get traffic or get liuliang. And these days, increasingly, the story about WeChat is no longer just messaging and payments, but the concept of this new initiative called 小程序, which in English is mini programs. And there's been some noise about mini programs in the news over the past year and a half, but it's really interesting to look at the numbers. It's starting to take off. I'd say this mini program concept has been around for over a year, and since that time, there's been about 580,000 mini programs or apps built within WeChat itself.
And wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. And before I get any further, for those who don't know what a mini program is, think about it as any app, but just built within the WeChat ecosystem. And so instead of needing to go to an app store or using a separate operating system to access an app on your phone, people can literally build apps within WeChat such that it's platform agnostic. And if I open up WeChat in an Android phone versus Apple versus Xiaomi variant, it's all going to be the same app within it. And it started off pretty light, kind of simple applications and things like that, but it's gotten a lot more complicated, and apps are pretty sophisticated as well. So so 580,000 of these apps, and as a few examples, it could be anything from what JD is doing already in terms of e-commerce app to I think it's like 123.com, or Ctrip has its own app within WeChat itself, which I use pretty often to book plane tickets and travel. There's also other apps that are almost, I want to say, quite native to WeChat mini programs, but really built upon WeChat and use the liuliang, the traffic native to WeChat. Now, I'll give you an example there. So Pinduoduo, obviously a lot of people have heard about that company. It's think about it as like a turbocharged Groupon, but it heavily leverages WeChat traffic. Not just mini programs, but also the concept of group chats and sharing. Everything's so easy when you have hundreds or thousands of friends within WeChat, and you can kind of share potential deals around and keep people to get in, and as such reduce the prices. But Pinduoduo, the reason why it grew so quickly and hit these numbers are absurd. I think like 20 billion GMV within like 3 years time, and evaluations of tens and tens of billions of dollars. Yeah, it's pretty absurd. This occurred in just 3 years time, and it's not only attributed to WeChat, but that was a big part of the user acquisition. The cost of acquiring traffic and users was extremely low, and really helped the company with its growth. In terms of WeChat Mini program, so we mentioned that it's about 580,000 apps built over the past year and a half. In terms of users on it, it's a really high number as well as you might imagine with China. So WeChat has about 1 billion users in total, and over half of these guys are using mini programs. So yeah, so basically, if you're a new startup trying to build something, you want to find ways to access traffic, and a lot of people are looking at WeChat mini programs because you have instantaneously 500 million users that you potentially access. And the thing about the traffic on WeChat mini programs is that it's really cheap because at least currently there's no transaction cost. Like for example, Apple Store or other smartphone stores have to pay a certain percentage, whether it's 20, 30, 40, etc. But for mini programs, currently it's free. It won't always be the case. I mean, it could be the case that WeChat or Tencent increases the rates there to monetize a little bit. There's also some risk there that the fact that mini programs is built on WeChat, which is a Tencent platform, so it's not nearly as open. But at least right now, a lot of folks, not just startup founders, but also investors, are looking at opportunities that are built with or built within the WeChat mini programs.
Right. You mentioned that the current customer acquisition cost for these mini programs within the ecosystem is extremely low. Do you see in the future that WeChat might monetize by charging for marketing or ads as well? Or are they doing so already?
Yeah. So I think that I mean, there's always a possibility down the road, but I think what Tencent or WeChat cares a little bit more about is just um, building up the platform to maximize traffic. I mean, the whole point of their business, like Tencent is a very good example of classic consumer internet in China, and because their business is spread out across a lot of different areas, gaming, social media, messaging, payments, etc. All they really care about is traffic. They want to find ways to maximize traffic, whether it's via their current offerings or via their broad set of investments. They want to maximize traffic. So I think their key intention is really to get as many people to use WeChat and these many programs as possible, get some positioning, and I don't think they're so worried about monetizing anytime soon on that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, because looking at the trajectory of social media in the US, like Facebook, right now, their primary business model is through ads. So just curious how the China counterpart is like kind of strategizing that in the future.
hmm Well, in China, I mean, it's not just WeChat or Tencent, but one of the major differences is that consumer internet companies don't need to monetize only through advertisement. It seems like a relatively clunky model because when you think about it, let's say you have an app, you want users to use it, and then as such you get traffic, you get eyeballs. So one way to monetize that is by advertisement. But what are ads used for? It's used to encourage transactions. So in China, when a lot of people have payments built directly into your phones, you can kind of bypass that advertising stage and instead draw people in to look at products and look at reviews and look at user-generated content. Just buy a product directly. So there's pretty interesting models that are built out of that. I mean, a lot of folks have talked about this in the past. I won't go over this in too much detail, but when you look at examples like I don't know, like live video, 一直播, 映客, those companies basically involve a live streaming app with a set of broadcasters, basically just singing, dancing, doing whatever they do, and then all the viewers, they love this content, extremely entertaining for them, and not only do they watch it, but also pay virtual currency and gifts in order to encourage broadcasters to do more stuff or to give them shout outs. So yeah, pretty innovative, interesting models in China. You don't really see in the US as much in certain cases.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And speaking of consumer internet, I think another sector that has been really popular in China these days is actually education. And having grown up in China, I know that education is really an integral part of basically every household. And after the one-child policy got abolished a couple years ago, really there's this new baby boom with this new population of young children. And how has that impacted the education sector in China? And what are the opportunities and challenges?
Yeah, education is definitely a really big sector in China. It's a large opportunity from a VC perspective as well. And like the points that you mentioned basically serves as a foundational aspects. So because the one child policy, then a lot of folks growing up over the past couple of decades essentially have three sets of parents, right? It's like your mom's side, your dad's side, the grandparents. Everyone's kind of catering around the one child. So a lot of money is spent on food is one major area, but also education.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of money in the sector in general. I think these days, since we're focusing on I suppose tech and what VC interest, because of the digitization of education, essentially, you have people not just from first tier cities, but second tier cities, third tier cities, with increasing access to the internet. They're able to access a lot of educational content, whereby if they just relied on local teachers, they might not be able to access such knowledge. This is not just content, but also platforms that allows teachers to remotely teach kids in other areas. And one really good example of that is VIP Kid. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard about that company. I forgot their valuation, was like $4 or $5 billion. It's pretty incredible. But what they've done is, I think they generated about $1 billion of revenue last year, probably close to $2 billion this year. That's incredible because it's only taken them 4 to 5 years time. And typically, there's not that many education companies that are making that much money a year, but typically it would take some of the offline counterparts to in order to achieve this, probably take over a decade. So you're seeing some pretty good opportunities that are coming out of that. In terms of there's also other areas of education that are interesting that are not just kind of online based marketplace or remote teaching. But I'll take a pause for now. I mean, is that kind of answer your question, or do you have any other related thoughts there?
Yeah, no, just keep going. I do have a question, but we'll hold on for now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I kind of drone on and on sometimes. Some of the models I'm particularly interested involve kind of some of the kind of knowledge sharing apps, so to speak. So, for example, in the US, podcasting is very popular. I mean, it's part of the reason why we're doing a podcast.
Mhm.
Usually, these podcasts are
Yep.
free, right? People just want to get it out there, share knowledge. In China,
Right.
excuse me, in the US, monetizing podcasts is via ads. Heard the advertisement for like Casper mattresses or other comparable products. In China, podcasting is really, really large, but not just podcasting, but I'll give an example as the better way to describe this. There's a few apps like Dedao or Ximalaya, and they're kind
Yeah.
of similar to, they're quite similar to podcasting or SoundCloud in the US, but they monetize heck of a lot better. And
Hmm.
is this one is that they actually charge. So but they don't charge for ads. They actually charge subscription in order for the listeners to access this content. So not all content has a fee attached to it. A lot of it is free, but the fact is that a lot of people in China, they want to learn. I mean, there's a focus on education. There's also a feeling of FOMO. It's that if I'm not listening to educational content on my way to work or something like that, then maybe I'll be getting behind some of my peers, or just that a lot of people like the concept of learning. So, for example,
Hmm.
in Dedao and Ximalaya, there's a lot of these short audio sessions where I don't know, it could be like 5 minutes, it could be a little bit longer, and and then these sessions are done every single day or every single week, and have a subscription price of, let's say, 99 RMB or 199 RMB, and people are willing to pay for that because they just want to consistently access quality content. There's also longer form content where some individuals are basically creating classes or coursework that's all audio based, and they might charge a little bit more for that type of content. But you see a wide variety of such educational content on platforms like Dedao and Ximalaya. And Ximalaya, I'm not sure if folks in the US or around the world are familiar with it, but they're already a unicorn. They're valued at $3 to $4 billion. I think they had a pre-IPO round earlier this year. They're going to go public pretty soon. But you compare that to SoundCloud, where it was quite valuable at one point. Obviously, has hit a number of hurdles and recently had trouble raising more money. But some of these Chinese counterparts are massively more profitable than some of the global counterparts.
Right. So besides the point that you mentioned about like Chinese people's willingness to learn, do you think there's any other factors that might contribute to this unique success in particular Chinese market versus the US market that isn't doing so well in terms of monetizing content?
Yeah. I mean, one big part of it is literally mobile payments. So I mentioned earlier, because when you have payments attached to your phone, it really makes it a lot easier to monetize, right? So
Mhm.
like you're reducing friction for the users to pay. So if everyone has
Right.
pay on their phone and everyone's using WeChat Pay or 支付宝 or like Alipay, and a lot of these the coursework on Ximalaya or Dedao is so cheap, folks don't really think much about it. They kind of have a habit of just pressing the pay button. I think that's a really big part of it. And also, I would say that from the content generation side, the quality is very, very good. I mean, you have a lot of folks. Like think about it as a gig economy, but perhaps it's a bit more structured. Folks are putting a lot of effort and time into building such content. You have some folks who are near celebrity status. For example, Bob Xu from Zhenfeng is one of the so-called educators on these platforms. You have
Hmm.
yeah, you have like former TV anchor people or current anchor people. You have folks who are experts in their areas. You have some folks from like a I guess like a movie or films background. It's
Right.
yeah, so the quality is very very good, and when the quality is good and is actually relatively instructive, then there should be a willingness to pay for that content. And I might even take an example of a U.S. company, Masterclass. Um,
Hmm.
for those who don't know, Masterclass is basically like a number of celebrities who are sharing best practices with their audience, and people pay subscription fees in order to access this content. So really quality content on one side, and then a wide audience base that wants to learn from the very best. So I'm not sure there's a Chinese comparable done that way, but at least via Dedao, Ximalaya, some other platforms, you have kind of many examples of that happening. So it explains why people are willing to pay for such content.
Right. That's super interesting. And it seems like just in the consumer sector, just education is also just like an emerging like
Mhm.
force that people should really look into.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Oh, actually,
yeah.
one more point there. The thing is, again, I haven't been in the U.S. In a while, so I'm not really sure what the latest developments are there. But in China, a lot of these educational concepts we're talking about, they're online based. But there's also offline based education and a kind of more of like an O2O, like online offline type complementary service. So what I mean by that is, so let's keep in mind example as I mentioned earlier, but now let's think about some of these instructors not just having online content that they monetize via like monthly subscription fees, but also they're teaching classes offline. So 混沌大学, I think it's like dumpling school, whatever it's called in English. They do
Hmm.
a really, really good job because essentially it's taught by 大咖 or taught by subject matter experts for other 大咖 and also lay people. But you have instructors like Yao Jingbo from 58.com. You have Liu De, who's essentially the head of Xiaomi's ecosystem. People like that of that caliber are teaching. And I remember I didn't attend a class, but some of the folks from a company I was advising, Segway Robotics and Segway Ninebot, their CEO Luke Gao went. Segway Robotics president Pu Li went. Alex Wang, their global VP of sales, all went. And it's an opportunity for them not just to learn, but also to network with other leaders and business managers and losing my English technologists in the field.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, these sessions monetize extremely well and are very very popular.
Right. Would you say it's because maybe China hasn't really had as like an established business school as the US, whereas like US has like a very established like business school ecosystem within each university?
I haven't examined this area, so I don't have specific examples to speak to that. That might be partially the case, but also I think just an opportunity for a lot of these guys to get together and learn a little bit, and also just a network. It's very
Right.
how do I put it this way? Like the commitment is not that great. You're not spending
Hmm.
most of your time, but you're maybe kind of spending a few classes to learn some certain concept and just to meet people. Like in China, this type of social arrangement happens a lot, whether it's classes, whether it's grabbing dinner, whether it's grabbing drinks. I would say the VCs and founders here, are very active.
Hmm.
Not to say folks in Silicon Valley are not, but these guys are always hanging out together, always talking, always on WeChat. You have groups where there's like 100 people or 500 people, which is the limit on WeChat, of all these top founders or investors just communicating all the time. So I think part of it is just part of the Chinese culture as well.
That's super fascinating. And yeah, and we've heard a lot about like the explosive growth and this like very vibrant scene in the consumer space. So I think maybe now is a good time to jump into the enterprise landscape as well, because that's, I think a lot of people are more unfamiliar with that space in China.
Mhm.
And recently, I think enterprise softwares and just the enterprise sector has been really hot in the US with the consumerization of enterprise, that a lot of companies take this kind of bottom up approach of like people in the company adopt the software, and then the company later decide whether they should just purchase this as like SaaS model.
Mhm.
I just wonder how China is kind of what China is doing in that space, and what are your thoughts on sort of the growth opportunities for enterprise software?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of people are looking at enterprise software these days, not just in China, but also global VCs that want to find a way to enter the China market and kind of find these opportunities. Enterprise is definitely way behind consumer internet in China.
Hmm.
When you mentioned it's kind of bottoms up SaaS, that that don't really see too much of that for a number of reasons. One is that like in general, SaaS is not really used much in these companies because a lot of folks they don't want to pay for it. Might be a bit more traditional, but yeah. So when labor is relatively cheap, you can kind of throw resources to solve a problem. And secondly, I mean, a lot of the growth has come from just moving really fast by raising large amounts of money. When there's growth, you don't really think about efficiency nearly as much, right? It's not top of mind for you. And I would say, I mean, like whatever you can solve with using Excel, which is also free in China. I mean, there's a lot of different types of ways out there. Then you probably don't need, yeah, you probably don't need a really defined or kind of a focused software at every level of the organization. Um, so I guess what you see today is that this is probably still the trend. It's an opportunity in the sense that there's not too many unicorns in this area. Probably the biggest companies enterprise software landscape in China are like 30 to 40 billion RMB. And when you look at the US, I mean, just Salesforce itself is probably bigger than, well, yeah, it's like bigger than any of such companies in China. And there's many of these examples in the US. Actually, well, Salesforce is probably a bad example. It's a huge company, but there's many companies in the US that are extremely valuable in an enterprise
Right.
software space. So you don't really see that, which is why people are interested. But it is still pretty early days, and the consumer behavior isn't going to change overnight. So it's probably more of like a, I don't know, maybe like a 5 to 10 year type opportunity. Um, I'd also say in terms of enterprise software, you really need to look at who the buyers and the users are, right? Like enterprise software, a lot of it is convincing other companies and units and organizations within those companies to buy this product. So it requires really good sales, and also it kind of takes longer cycles. But you really need to understand who your buyers are. So in China, there's still a lot of these SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and those guys don't really buy such software. For them, every time they deal with a vendor, it's kind of project-based. So you kind of have a few instances of them buying SaaS solutions to solve certain issues. Um, but I would say a lot of the private companies, they're increasingly more open to using SaaS for a couple of
Hmm.
different reasons. One is well, and it's not just SaaS, just like in general, enterprise software solutions. I'd say that one of the reasons is what I mentioned earlier around efficiency. Because the thing is, there's still a lot of capital in China. I think there's probably a little bit of cooling down, but at a certain point, you can't just grow by raising more money or entering a bunch of existing markets. A lot of companies are doing that, but at a certain point, efficiency and profitability becomes important. So there needs to be certain tools that is able to make business processes more efficient within those companies. Secondly, there's a lot more highway coming back to China, so overseas Chinese returning. Um,
Hmm.
and this is important because a lot of these guys have worked in large US companies like Google, Facebook, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc. And those companies are run very well and use such software. So for example, even at Segway Ninebot, Segway Robotics, we were using Jira. we're using Zendesk. Actually, I kind of push the team to use that because customer service is extremely important, and we're trying to sell our products abroad. Then those interactions with the customer needs to be managed well. But when you have overseas Chinese coming back to China, they realize the importance of efficiency. They also are very used to a lot of these tools. And, sure, they might use like a US tool, but at the same time, because in China, whether it's given a firewall or just the fact that servers are based onshore, it's oftentimes probably faster to use Chinese variants of those tools, especially when it's localized for the China market. So I'd imagine that there's probably more Chinese homegrown enterprise software companies that are built up over the next couple of years that are already kind of existing, but are going to grow much faster over the next couple of years. It is part of that overall trend. I would say, in some cases, Chinese companies, they need to look to new solutions because the existing ones, even American software solutions, are just insufficient. So, for example, Mobike or some other Chinese company with a ton of DAUs, they can't really use classic Oracle solutions, database solutions, because it's insufficient for their needs. When you have hundreds of millions of DAU, then you need something more powerful. And and these solutions don't need to be only Chinese, but I think one of my buddies at China Growth Capital, they invested in a Chinese team that has global operations. They're called PingCap, and I'm not an expert in this certain field, but they use kind of a NoSQL approach, and also like a TiDB database approach that makes it even feasible for Mobike to store and manage its data more effectively. So
right.
Yeah, so I think just summarize a little bit. It's a combination of the fact that some of these people used to using such solutions are coming back to China. There are real business needs. Companies need to be more efficient. And also, I think there's going to be a lot more interest from investors that want to find a new big growth area, both from Chinese investors, but also foreign investors trying to get in. That really push this market further.
Yeah, this is super interesting. And you mentioned a little bit about data and in terms of Mobike. And I'm curious because recently in the US, I think artificial intelligence has been like a hot topic just worldwide for the past couple of years. But recently, I think there's this new wave of enterprise software that really leverage the data they collect and kind of offer business intelligence solutions and build softwares around that. So I'm curious to see kind of the state of AI in China, because I've also heard a lot of things about AI in China, and there are a lot of talents sort of like getting their PhD in the US and returning to China to further develop products around this area. So could you give an overview of how AI is doing right now?
Yes. So I'm not an expert in this area, but I do have conversations with some of my friends in the whether it's deep tech or VC industry. So my general sense is that it's clearly hot. It's a hot area, a lot of money in it. It's one of those areas where U.S. and China are kind of at the forefront, and there's a lot of exchange between U.S. and China, at least now on this area. And the way I look at it is, so you mentioned some of these PhDs coming back. Yeah, I would say probably 2014, 2015, you have a lot of academics that are coming out to 创业, to start their own companies. And
right.
A lot of VCs wanted to put money to back those talents. And then a couple years ago, so 15, 16, 17, you had more folks leaving BAT, so Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, in order to pursue AI opportunities. So you had a lot of great talent coming out. And there were a number of deals at the time. So quite a bit of the low-hanging fruit was taken. Obvious examples would be image recognition, used for security purposes, things like that. They actually become large businesses in China. So these days, given that a lot of these guys come out and some of the low-hanging fruit is taken, then I'd say there's fewer such really interesting hot deals. I think there's a lot more later stage deals, probably Series C and D.
Right.
When there are some really exciting talents that come out and want to start companies, then the rounds are extremely expensive. So over $100 million for Series A's or even seeds. So for example, whether it's Horizon Robotics or Pony.ai or IB Koji, basically the founders were extremely impressive and had good teams and just raised a lot of money right out of the gate. So that's it kind of from, I guess, like a talent and funding perspective. In terms of kind of like some of the applications of AI, and just to my knowledge, I would say, to your point, the earliest days were around big data, probably like 2014 or so. 2015 was a big focus on computer vision. Again, a lot of times it's applied to security. And these days, obviously, autonomous vehicles as well. Um, NLP and chatbots became a bit popular a couple years ago. AI chips, which enable computing power, a couple of those startups kind of cropped up. And obviously these days are increasingly important because China wants to be more self-reliant and not only use US chips. And not to like the whole ZT, like Huawei situation there. Um, Over the past year, I would say it's probably more around applied AI. So not just working on the deep tech itself, trying to find ways to insert it into actual use cases, whether it's in retail, for example, recognition and pay, whether it's for education. There's a few companies that have essentially question and answer boxes for students, and they kind of offer different questions and different answers based on how the student progresses. AI is used for content as well. So Toutiao, a lot of people have heard about that company. They have hundreds of millions of MAUs, and I forgot how many DAUs, but some absurd number. But they have a really good content recommendation engine, which just kind of feeds you more and more content and videos based on your previous history. Secondhand sales of car sharing or car sales, online car sales platforms, if that's the right way to speak English. They use quite a bit of AI in order to better recommend certain products. You see a lot of AI applied in those situations,
Right.
and they're creating real business value. And I would say, like today and moving forward, I mean, I see a lot of people talking about autonomous vehicles, a bunch of companies raising money there. We'll kind of see how that plays out. There'll probably be a bit more attention applied to IoT products, AI plus
Right.
IoT, and also robotics. Because a lot of the stuff that are being built are not really tangible. You can't really touch it, but at least for me, I mean, especially having worked at Sega Robotics for a while and advised their team, it'd be really cool to have like smarter robotic solutions, companions, tools to use. That'd just be really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I think you already started touching on this, but I think, yeah, AV is definitely one of the hot trends here as well. I'm just curious to hear from like an early stage investor's perspective, what are some other opportunities you think startups can really pursue right now? Because like to my understanding, like in the US, whenever a trend sort of emerges, there will be probably like 20 companies that are competing, and the competition is already very fierce. But in China, sometimes it can be hundreds of companies. So what are your thoughts on some of the new opportunities that startups can pursue right now?
Yeah, that's true. So it is very competitive in China. It's very competitive in Silicon Valley as well. I suppose here there's just more numbers. So for any startup, I mean, speed is very key. Execution, fundraise as well. Fundraising becoming almost like a competitive differentiator. The more money you can raise, then the easier it is to attract talent and just start doing things. I don't think any of those are gonna change. That's just gonna be kind of like the table stakes in China.
Right.
So at the same time, environment's different here too. A lot of people put attention on the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and they should, because these guys are huge sprawling businesses in a number of different areas, and also really large investors as well. And the fear is that how can you start a really large company without these guys noticing and turn into the next BAT? I mean that is an issue, I suppose. At the same time, there's a lot of large companies that were able to be built. And if the BATs or the Googles, Facebooks of the world could build everything, then I don't know. I guess Google would have created Facebook, or Amazon would have created like all these other valuable companies. So I think there's still something to be said of smart startup teams that are really well incentivized by building up something really valuable, something that they care about. You can't really just build such businesses within large companies because the incentive structure is going to be very different. It's not as much freedom. I would say that in China, people are definitely a bit more conscious of that. than folks in the US because the BAT companies are very well known for replication, just copying, and they're super, super
Right.
aggressive. Um, so I'd say in China, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, definitely build something that you care about because if you're not passionate or you don't have good background or right people for a certain type of business, it's not gonna succeed anyways. But at the same time, if you find a way to fly under the radar of some of the larger companies, it's probably be helpful to your cause. So when I think of really large companies that came out despite BAT, I might think about, I don't know, live video, like dating apps like Momo, Tantan,
Right.
those companies because at the time the addressable market didn't seem that big, and when you're a really large company, you probably don't want to build small things. So those companies kind of just flew on the radar, became quite valuable, and now are quite a bit bigger, have gone public. Another company that everyone talks about these days is Toutiao, and
Hmm.
they're humongous. I don't even know what their valuation is. Definitely over $20 billion. But when they started off, it was kind of like a content or news engine app, and no one really knew how they were going to make money, or they didn't believe in how big they could become. So when you have opportunities that kind of fly under the radar that the BATs, other giants don't really notice, then these could become really, really big. But I would say that just because there's BAT in China doesn't mean that all startups are doomed to fail. Probably the other thing to think about it, other way to think about this is what are some startup opportunities in second and third tier cities?
Right.
Because what we don't realize is that China is not just Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. Obviously, love those places, wonderful cities with a lot of startup people. But there's more Chinese people in second and third tier cities, and a lot of times there's less of a focus on them. So, for example, Qutoutiao is another startup that was founded I don't know like 2 years ago. It's quite comparable to Total, but it focuses on some of the second and third tier cities. They have an interesting
Mm.
concept where for content, if you as a reader read someone else's content or watch someone else's video, you get paid a certain percentage of the money that would otherwise be paid to advertisers. It kind of makes sense because you're essentially incentivizing people to read such content, and advertising dollars just distribute a little bit more so. But it's one quick way to really quickly acquire users compared to a traditional method where I guess for Total, you build out content, get users, and then insert ads and make money from that. That's a company that, if I recall, is going public soon or has already gone public.
It's running out of time, so I have to ask this because this is probably on top of everyone's mind when talking about China right now. So, how has the US and China trade war sort of impacted the tech and startup sector in China, if it does have an impact?
Hmm. Yeah. So that's it's a little bit concerning. The U.S.-China trade war. We're gonna talk to someone at Harbinger in probably a couple weeks' time who knows a lot more about this area. But based on what he's already starting to tell me, CFIUS, which is taking a step back, the trade war itself might not just be a trade war, right? Because
Right.
there might be broad implications on a geopolitical plane, and there's certain sectors, whether it's AI, security, fintech, that are becoming
Hmm.
more sensitive. So there obviously might be impact in those areas whereby, for example, you might see certain things like folks educated in the U.S. going back to China to build AI startups there, or there might be certain talents that are based in the U.S. They're just sent back to China. Like that 1,000 talents program. Is that what it's called? A bunch of folks
Yeah.
were just kind of sent back. Hmm. Yeah. So you kind of see that happening a little bit already, um, and then also in terms of kind of cross-border flows and investments, there's going to be impact there as well. Right. So like usually in the past, a lot of Chinese VCs and companies invested heavily in the U.S. And I would say I think like 2016 was probably the top year for kind of inbound capital into the U.S. from Chinese investors, about $50 billion. And then
Hmm.
2017, this number went down to a tad under $30 billion. And I think earlier this year, I looked at a statistic. The first half of this year, it went down to about $2 billion. So you're seeing quite a
Wow.
drastic decrease. Yeah, a drastic decrease in terms of Chinese capital or venture capital going to the U.S. Um, and partially, this is because of some of the tension, like trade war, but I would say
Hmm.
more specifically, there's a certain body called CFIUS in the US, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS. And Congress also passed this act called FIRMA, which stands for the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act. And essentially, it just gives more power to CFIUS to review more deals that involve Chinese parties. So, back in the day, this would usually kind of kick into play when a Chinese company is looking to acquire a large US company or trying to, make a large investment into a pretty prominent US company. And these days, if Chinese investors are trying to do minority investments, then these could very well also be reviewed under CFIUS. Or even it could be the case that US investors or global investors that have significant Chinese LPs, their deals in the US might also be reviewed. Obviously, not every single one's going to be reviewed. The committee, the number of folks working on this in the US is not infinite, but certainly could slow down the investment process for a lot of such deals. And also just from like a headline perspective and from a overall field perspective, it's not that positive. So it remains to be see how serious this will be. But already some of the Chinese money is slowing down when it comes to entering the U.S. In terms of U.S. capital into China, actually, I haven't looked at the statistics there, but I would imagine is probably much less of an impact there. China
Hmm.
is probably trying to be more open in general, maybe if not to the U.S., to Israel, to other places. It's really trying to paint itself as being kind of more of a like an easier place to do business, especially given some of the hardline stances that Trump and the U.S. government has taken. So I think from a U.S. investor or global investor perspective, entering China is still doable. There's still opportunity. I mean, obviously, entering China has never been easy. You just need to make sure you work with the right partners or have folks on
Right.
the ground who understand the market such that you get into the right deals and do some good terms. But there's no hard constraints to invest in Chinese opportunities that I know of.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, you mentioned the capital side of some of the challenges there. But I also want to touch a little bit on the talent side because you yourself went back to China, I guess went to China because you're from the US in 2017 to kind of be a part of this really exciting movement. And as more people are going to the US to study, there are also more people interested in going back to China who study in the US to pursue opportunities there. So, on a talent perspective, do you have any sort of thoughts or advice on, talents in the US interested in working in China?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, I think this is becoming increasingly uh, it's becoming easier actually for folks to come back to China, whether you're a Haikui, overseas Chinese coming back home, or you're ABC, American-born Chinese, or non-Chinese. I don't have the specific names of some of these policies, but I've seen a number of policies in China that basically allows foreigners to more easily access visas or business permits to working, let's say, special parts of Shanghai or Beijing or what have you, and also for Haikui, like coming back to China uh, has always been a possibility. I think for a period, some of these guys were able to come back, build some pretty amazing businesses because they had foreign knowledge and know-how that some of the locals competitors did not have. However, over the past period, I would say I don't know, since the 2010s, there's a big focus on this concept called JDT, or being
Right.
very localized, so to speak. So even if you're a
Hmm.
Haikui or you're overseas Chinese, you coming back to China doesn't mean that you're gonna absolutely succeed. And there might be a bit of a 歧视, a bit of a I don't even know how to say this in English anymore, a bit of a concern that you're almost too foreign in order to
Right.
build up successful businesses or relationships in China. You're just not going to understand how business is done here. I think that's all changing actually because China is becoming more globalized. You're getting a lot more folks with global educations or working with global companies, or just as the environment develops in China, then I think everything kind of converges a little bit. So we see a lot of very talented overseas Chinese come back to China to build up these businesses. Pinduoduo
Hmm.
was founded by, I think his name is Colin Jin, who is
Hmm.
Haikui. He worked at Google for a number of years, came back. Liu Li Shuo I'm not sure the English name. It's basically a language learning app. Their founder, Wang Yi, is also a Haigui. Their company is
Mhm.
going public later this, I think next month actually, or this month. They've done very, very well.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, guys like Fan Ling, who's the CEO of
Mhm.
Tazine, which is essentially like how would you describe it? I think you know the company pretty well, right? Like a design
Right. It's more like an enterprise software, but also kind of like a marketplace for companies to find creative talents and
Yes.
solutions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so they're pretty well known in China, and their founder was, I believe, a Harvard and a Princeton PhD and a teacher at one point in the U.S. before coming back to China. So you're
Yeah.
increasingly seeing more such examples, and I think so. I mean, some VCs are in fact focused on bringing back Haigui talents to China to found companies. I noticed some news by GGV recently where they almost have a bit of a, I'm not sure if it's like an accelerator or incubator type program where they find these Haigui, connect them with successful Haigui founders in China, provide coursework and maybe some other sort of support to encourage.
Right. They have a fellowship program this winter,
Oh,
which
that's
is
what it
to
is. Okay.
bring back, yeah, some of the Haigui and yeah, and help them network with some of the local university students, which I thought was really interesting.
hmm Yeah, yeah. So I'd say all in all, there are some positive drivers when it comes to folks coming to China to work. I focus on Haigui. I suppose an area I know a little bit better. But even for folks like ABC, so I'm in ABC, American Born Chinese, and I just came out. I mean, I was much less equipped to find opportunities in China, deal with some of the challenges and the upside. But even for someone like me, there's a lot of people who are very friendly, open-minded, willing to support. And I think for a lot of our listeners, if you're ABC or non-Chinese or Haigui, I mean, China's growing really quickly. Everyone knows that. But despite a lot of the trade war fears and some of the geopolitical tension, you can't really dispute the fact that there's going to be growth here anyhow. And knowing China really, really well is going to be an increasingly important kind of knowledge and differentiator to have.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you, Adam. That was super awesome. It was really informative and definitely a great overview of the whole Chinese landscape right now.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And I don't know all these areas super well, but if folks have more questions, you can always ping us, and we'll try to bring on other more qualified speakers who really know the industries.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and please check out our website, theharbingerchina.com, for all the episodes featuring Adam's interviews with leaders in the Chinese tech industry. I'll see you next time.